All right, welcome to Paladin Financial Talk. I'm your co-host, Tony Shore, and I'm here with our host, Ellie Robinson.
Hi, Tony.
Ellie, how are you?
Good. How about you?
I am great. We're clear across the studio from each other today because we have this huge new studio, but we want to be facing each other. And the way our podcast table sits, usually if we have 4 guests, there'd be a number of guests on one camera. But now it's just Ellie and I at the opposite ends.
Yeah. You're so far away from me, Tony. It's so strange. But this table is like half an octagon going here.
Yes, it is.
Interesting.
It is. Yeah. Isn't that odd?
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
I like it. I like it. I love the new studios. It's great to be here with you, Ellie.
Yeah.
It's been a few weeks since we've talked, since you've been on. Nikki's been here with some guests. Last week we had Matt on. Matt is great. Mm-hmm. I love Matt. He's a great guy. And the whole Paladin team, really. Yeah. I enjoy it. Now, Ellie, before we get started, how have you been? What's going on?
I've been good. I'm in a talking mood today, Tony,
Good.
so I got to make sure that I slow it down a little bit. I feel like so much has happened since the last time that we talked. I booked some tickets to New York City this fall.
Really?
I ended up inviting like 16 girls to join.
Oh my goodness.
Not that many are going to be coming. Like it was more of a, I know everyone has busy lives and they're having babies and whatnot, so not everyone can come, but I'm making it a girls trip. So I have that on my horizon. I ended up
So Matt and I aren't invited.
I mean, if you wanted to show up, you could.
No. I'll pass.
So I've been planning that. I'm super excited for that. Literally last weekend, I ended up buying tickets for the Morgan Wallen concert. He's coming to town. I don't know if you heard, but all over the news, he was arrested.
Yeah.
Literally a day later after I bought the tickets. I was like, great, you could have done this maybe a year from now. Like, wait until you come to Minneapolis.
He threw a chair off the roof
in Nashville
of a big Nashville bar downtown there, a big new one, in fact. And it was Eric Church's new place.
Yes.
Eric Church has a new bar downtown. It's like 4 stories.
Yeah.
And there's a rooftop patio where Morgan Wallen was hanging out.
Yes.
And for some reason, I think he might have had a little too much. He threw a chair off. But did you hear what happened? The chair landed right next to 2 policemen and almost hit them.
Yes, that's what I heard, too.
So he went to jail.
I think 3 felony counts and up to 1 to 15 years in prison is apparently what they're saying.
He's not going to get any time. It's a $15,000 fine that he's going to pay. I think I heard.
He was smiling like a little kid in his mugshot.
I know he was. That was crazy.
So
he's very popular. You got a lot going on in your social life. I mean, Morgan Wallen concert, New York City is something. I've been there a couple of times.
Have you?
And I really enjoyed visiting. I would never want to live there.
I've never been.
But everyone should visit. Are you going to a Broadway show, maybe?
We are. So I signed us up for And Juliet is the name of the Broadway show. And actually, I heard it from Nikki first. She's the one who went last year. It's like a play off of Romeo and Juliet, but instead of Juliet committing suicide after Romeo does, she instead takes her girlfriends and run off to Paris. So I felt like it was a very fitting storyline for a girls' weekend in New York City.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
busy.
Of course, Nikki gave you the hot tip. That's just so.
She said it was so
she's
good.
all over that stuff.
Yeah, so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sign us up for this.
Yeah, but also you've been in the meantime. You work hard. We don't want to make it sound like all fun and games because I know you thought you might be late to today's recording because you're meeting with clients and prospects and people who have questions, people who have heard you on the show, people who call in or maybe meet you at one of the workshops or seminars or webinars. So I think that's fantastic. I know you love talking to people and love meeting with people. So I want to encourage our viewers and our listeners out there that if they have questions about what you talk about today, Ellie, or they want to get a financial plan in place or make sure they're on track for a successful retirement, these are all things that you can help them with, and the whole Paladin team is there to support that. I think that's fantastic. Now, I didn't mean to belabor our talk.
No, this is
great.
good. You're going to need to keep the ball rolling. I can talk all day.
So what's our topic for today? What are we talking about?
This month we're focusing on wealth management specifically, and then we're chopping it up into 4 different weeks. And so my theme this week is talking about the accumulation phase of life and how to essentially grow your assets.
Okay.
If you think of your like lifespan of when you start working through the end of life, we chop up your time horizon into your accumulation phase, your working years.
Yeah.
And then when you flip the switch on retirement, those are going to be your income or distribution years. You treat those two phases of your life differently, because that's exactly what it is. Like, you're spending down your money once you retire. And so how do you allocate your assets appropriately? That's what we are the professionals in. But
awesome.
Like, getting to that point in life is what I want to focus on.
Yeah, it can be tricky for people, and especially nowadays, there are so many changes and laws and rules. There are a lot of ways to go wrong when it comes to creating an income in retirement, which is the distribution phase, and that's what we're focusing on today, right? The distribution phase.
No. The accumulation.
Oh, the accumulation.
Phase.
We're starting with accumulation. You have to begin with accumulation first. I'm jumping ahead. I love that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're on the right track. Like, we are essentially working 40 years, 4 decades to build up your investments and flip the switch on retirement and then start spending down, which is your distribution phase there. I oftentimes use the terminology flip the switch on retirement, which is not very accurate though, like, full disclosure, just because it's more of like a dimmer switch. When you're turning on
gradual.
a light, it's gradual.
Yeah.
Because those essentially 5 years gearing up for retirement, you got to start getting your assets appropriately diversified to make sure that you have a little bit more conservative, a little bit more balanced, and then still have your growth buckets. So your short-term, medium-term, long-term buckets.
Okay.
So
the accumulation phase, that would be during your working years.
Yes.
And you're accumulating money. And a lot of people during this phase, they have questions like, am I saving enough? Things like that, I would assume.
Yes. And I want to touch on that a little bit later, though. Let's focus on just getting the growth, essentially, because that's just the reoccurring topic that we keep talking about here. Making sure that you're tucking away money every single month is going to be the priority in saving for retirement. And the longer time horizon you have, the better. So if you start tucking away $100 now and every single month until retirement, that accumulates. So the accumulation phase into your nest egg for retirement. Now, one thing that I usually school my younger clients who are still in their first 20 years of a career is everything that you do with your money has some level of risk associated with it. Even if you didn't invest it whatsoever, you just saved $100 in a checking account for the next 40 years, that $100 is losing its value against inflation. So you have some level of risk associated with anything that you do with your dollar.
So if you put your money under your mattress or in a coffee can, there is risk.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And there's more risk there than if you have it in a bank, because you're still going to lose money to inflation.
Exactly.
It's going to be worth less down the road, and there's a possibility it could burn in a fire or get stolen.
Exactly.
So don't put your money under your mattress.
Yeah, so that's one concept that I want to make sure that everyone understands is they assume that assuming in or investing in the stock market is super risky and scary. It can take a dip whenever. Well, it's like, well, anything that you do with your dollar has a risk associated with it.
Yeah.
So first disclosure there.
Yeah. But there's different levels of risk.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's where we really come into play as professionals is how do we mediate your risk as much as possible? A lot of people don't even realize the risks that they're taking when they put their dollar into a certain investment or doing something specific with it. And so making sure that we go down that checklist and saying, okay, just acknowledge this is what's happening with the choices that you're making and our recommendations on how to reallocate per se.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I'm trying here.
Asset allocation and leveling off the extreme highs and the extreme lows. You want it more level, but on a rise. You need that growth, but you want to avoid the big dips.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. This is good that we're having an open conversation about it. So, if we used the S&P 500 as a benchmark.
Yes.
So, I feel like that's what most people are comfortable understanding. The S&P 500, it's the 500 leading US-based companies, biggest companies of the public trading U.S.
Yeah.
stock market, essentially.
Yep.
And so historically, over time, you get major returns with the S&P 500. I do have an example here, is if you were to have invested $100 into the S&P 500 at the beginning of your career in 1980, let's say that you're 20 years old, you start working, you put $100 into the S&P 500 and never contribute anything again, ever. And you end up retiring at the end of 2023. So you're in your 60s, you retire. That $100 would essentially be $12,097.47.
Wow.
Now, I mean, imagine a bigger number that we're working with, and imagine fueling that fire in the next 40 years.
That's pretty good return.
That return essentially calculates to 11,997%.
Wow.
Which essentially is over 11% average per year.
Yeah.
Now, that's the average, though.
Yeah.
If you take a look at stock market history in the last 40 years, essentially there's been about 7 stock market crashes, and a couple of them were repercussions of international affairs. So a couple common ones that you might be familiar with, Tony, is Black Monday, which was in October 1987, which was a Monday that the S&P 500 dropped over 22%.
Yep.
Major. People were freaking out. Like, I think that's when they started creating the circuit breakers on the stock market. So if the market drops too quickly, they will halt all trading internationally for the S&P 500, essentially. So you can't trade any of those stocks. .com bubble in March 2000, that was the collapse of the technology bubble that was coming to play. I think there was a lot of talk around Y2K and the world ending at that time too. And so the S&P 500 was down 49% within 6 months.
Wow.
So that was a big dip. I
That's
think
huge.
One of the biggest ones that most people are going to remember the most was 2008.
Yes.
That was, stemmed from the housing market, and then the S&P 500 was down over 57% in the course of a year and 4 months.
Yeah, the Great Recession, they call that.
Yes. And so that is very scary to see your investable assets be slashed by 50%. However, if you know that you have a 30-year time horizon until retirement, you can weather through this.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly.
Since that time, the S&P keeps hitting record highs,
exactly.
the stock market.
Usually, the market can recover within 5 years after a stock market crash. And this isn't taken into consideration any stock market corrections.
Right.
We might have a correction this year. I don't know. No one really has a crystal ball there. The market's been pretty hot lately, and so there might be a small drawback this year, especially since it's an election year. Who knows? But that's okay. You can weather that kind of volatility in getting ready for retirement. Where we start hammering down on not having you allocated that growth-oriented way is when you get maybe 5 years to retirement. There's a threshold there. So that's where we start dialing back on that bucket of money being super growth-oriented.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you get closer to retirement, and in retirement, you don't want to have as much at risk.
Correct.
Because you can't then afford to have the 2022s as much. You don't want all your money in the market.
But if you think of it this way, a lot of people don't think of this. They retire at 65 and they have longevity in their genes, and they might live another 30, 40 years.
Yeah. A lot of people are living 30 years plus in retirement now.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do that, you can still have some money in long term. If you have money, for example, that you don't think you'll need in retirement and you want to leave it to loved ones, that money can be higher risk.
Correct. So that's where we're splitting everything up into
Sure.
your short-term, medium-term, and long-term
Sure.
buckets there. What does growth-oriented investments really mean, though? Let's talk about it. So I feel like a lot of younger clients, they just have their 401ks that they're contributing into.
Sure.
Your 401ks, they usually only offer about 20 different mutual funds to invest in. Matt talked about this last time, I think, on target date funds. They're a decent tool to use, but there's better options to invest in within your 401k. And even more so if you were to open up additional investment accounts outside of your 401k, which
like
you
an
fully
IRA,
can do.
traditional
Exactly.
IRA
or
or
Roth IRA.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's where I'll start leaning into our third-party money manager, Gradient Investments, for those additional accounts that we can manage here at Paladin, and using those growth-oriented portfolios that they have built for us, essentially. And so a couple of my favorites that I use for growth orientation is the Core Select portfolio or the ETF E-Series portfolio if it's a smaller account balance, because we want to make sure that you're well diversified across the board and achieving higher growth over time, essentially. So
yeah, that core portfolio, I was just talking this morning with Keith Gangle, the actual who's
portfolio
actually
manager.
He's the portfolio manager of that at Gradient Investments. And I know that you have direct contact with him. You can call him up. You can put him on the phone with your client. That's really, I mean, not a lot of people have that advantage that Paladin does to work directly with senior portfolio managers on these portfolios, and they're actively managed every day.
Exactly.
So.
That's also a huge misconception of advisors, like sitting in front of clients all day long and then also expecting to be the experts on specific stocks. Like, I'm sitting with clients all day long. I don't have the time to be trading additionally. So it's a huge value add to make sure that our clients know that we have experts who are sitting behind 6 monitors, if not more, analyzing these stocks day in and day out. And I have the time to start pulling together a holistic financial plan for my clients that makes sense.
That's
so it's
huge.
Like splitting out those jobs, I think, is a huge value add.
Yeah, it is. I can't agree more. Yeah. That's fantastic. It's a big advantage to the way Paladin handles things.
Yeah, I do love it. So, let's see here. So I put down some common questions on what I get a lot from my younger clients, and it doesn't have to be just younger, but in general, I get a lot of questions on, well, what happens if my accounts go to zero? People are just scared of the stock market. They're just scared of investing. They kind of put full trust into us, but
I cry.
There's
Do
some,
I weep? The answer is you weep.
People, who think that. I mean, this is the case is if you are well diversified, which is obviously what we're doing with our clients, like it is almost nearly impossible for your accounts to go to zero unless there's a zombie apocalypse.
Oh, the zombie apocalypse.
Where that shuts down
glad you brought that
our
up.
society.
I'm
like
glad
that
you
is
brought that up.
Probably the only thing that could make your accounts go to zero.
even more of a reality than Y2K. I love that. The zombie apocalypse.
That's a huge topic of conversation. Like, there's always going to be doomsdayers trying to make you scared of society collapsing, but just like Y2K. We were talking in the office earlier, the solar eclipse that happened.
The eclipse.
Earlier this week, we were talking around the office.
The total eclipse of the heart, right?
It was cloudy that day here, so we couldn't see it. It's a bummer. But we were saying, imagine people 2,000 years ago experiencing a solar eclipse and just freaking out. You'd think it's the end of the world if you had never seen that before or experienced that before. So it's there's always going to be people who are worried about the end of the world.
Well, and it's the media's fault because they just it's always the sky is falling, right?
Yes.
So you gotta take it with a grain of salt. Don't get overly emotional, and don't let those emotions or fears carry over into your financial decisions.
Exactly.
Right?
You got it right, Tony. You got it. Okay, so I have had multiple questions on why am I advising one thing, and then why is the client's tax professional advising something different? This actually happens more frequently than you'd expect because we're two different financial professionals looking at things from different perspectives. Tax preparers are often trying to get the best bang for your buck in that current year that they are filing for
now.
you. Right this second.
They're looking back at what you've done, and they're saying, hey, if you do this year, you'll have a lower tax burden. Or in this next year, do this because you'll have the lower tax burden. Because right now, we need to solve for this year's taxes.
Yes.
And that's what they're looking at.
Yes.
You're looking at the big picture.
Exactly.
You're looking at between now and where they end up. How are they going to have the most comfortable life and lose the least amount of money, save the most amount of money.
Exactly. And it's our job and responsibility to know the ins and outs of different kinds of investment accounts that you can have. For example, I had a client, their tax professional told them to max out their 401ks before doing backdoor Roth contributions. And I'm like, I wouldn't suggest that, and these are the reasons why, which usually isn't the specialized knowledge that a tax professional usually has. So that is a common question that we come across, but that's because we're looking at your finances and from two completely different perspectives. So make sure that you're aware of that, essentially.
Yeah. I think tax professionals are great, and you need to work with tax professionals, but you really need a quarterback or a coach that's looking at the big picture, that holistic approach. Right?
We love our CPAs. We love them because I'm not going to be reading tax law day in and day out. But yeah, exactly. I like the quarterback reference.
You don't want to have a ticking tax time bomb in retirement because this guy said this is the way you're going to save the most money right now.
Exactly.
And it's going to make him look good because he's like, look, I saved you this much on your taxes this year. That's great. But then that money is going to grow and grow and grow. And when it comes out and taxes are higher and you're in retirement, it might push you into a higher tax bracket. It could even make your Medicare costs go up because it puts you in a different tax bracket.
Exactly right. And they might be owing $100,000 in required minimum distributions at the age of 75, which we do not want. So exactly, we're taking things from a different approach when we're giving recommendations there. Another question that I've had in the past recently are, what are some red flags on tracking my retirement progress, essentially? Sure. And when you are in the accumulation phase of life, acknowledging that your biggest asset is usually your income. You usually don't have that much built up in investable assets 20, 30 years into your career. It's going to be your income is your most valuable asset. So making sure that you have appropriate insurance to, weather away any kind of catastrophes that might happen. If you are the breadwinner of your household and you have 3 minors that you are caring for, making sure that they have appropriate coverage for any, heaven forbid, catastrophes. So that's one. And then also, there's a lot of people who underestimate how much they might need in retirement. When we're building out our financial plans, we'll try to do a 30-year trajectory and say, okay, if you keep doing what you're doing with this growth rate and whatnot, hypothetical, you have $1 million. That might not be enough.
Right.
With spending, inflation, you don't really know what you're going to be doing in retirement.
True.
Most people, they're like, I don't know. Yeah. So making sure that we dial in on what is that firm goal. And I say firm loosely because it could change 10 years from now. You just never really know. So I guess those are the more important reasons on why we just want to meet with our clients at least once a year. It's not so much identifying red flags. It's just making sure that we're staying on top of your financial plan and refining things where we see fit, essentially.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and people have life changes, and so those need to be factored in. Maybe their goals for retirement change, or there's marriages, there might be deaths, marriages, births, things like that change your financial, that you want to make changes to your finances.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So you just never know.
Yeah.
Last question, common question, but we kind of touched on this a little bit, is I get a lot should I also be investing in other things besides my 401k, Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, a brokerage account? I am huge on opening up a brokerage account for my younger clients to help give them some level of liquidity. And especially if they might have an intermediate term goal, which I throw out the example, who knows if you want to put a pool in the backyard in 15 years from now, that might not be a goal right now, but you might have that and, not so far away and before retirement. And so having that investment account and having that level of liquidity and getting some higher returns over the next 15 years, I think is important for younger clients as well. So
that's huge. Yeah. That's great. And it's good that you're looking at those things and those options. And it comes back to when you need the money, where those assets, their assets get allocated, where their money goes depends on when they're going to need that money. You want to break it up in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right, Tony.
I try. I'm paying attention.
Yeah. the last thing that I printed out last minute, and I am just glancing at it here. Sorry, Tony, I did not provide this to you beforehand. But Jeff Quick overheard me talking about the topic today earlier at the office, and he was like, I want you to take a look at something. He had printed out a BlackRock article here and their statistics that they had ran from Bloomberg and Morningstar. Most of our clients should know what Morningstar is. We talk about Morningstar reports, so
yeah,
I'm having that nod there.
Financial reports.
Yeah.
That kind of sum up where you're at, what you have invested.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And how, exactly. So if you were to have, let's say, have your money invested in the S&P 500 in the last 40 years, and you got emotional and you got scared of the dips that happened, not just the stock market crashes, but some corrections as well thrown in there. So 20% dips, 10% dips, and it pulled out on those periods of time. It's really hard to time the market. You cannot be timing the market appropriately. Doesn't matter who you are. You don't know when that bottom is the true bottom.
It's not timing the market. It's time in the market.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So if you have missed up to 10 days of exposure in investing in the stock market over that time frame, you would have had a loss of $282,000 if you would have started with $100,000.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just reading this off the fly. Let's see here.
Yeah, so if you initially invested that much, grew it, and then you pulled it out and didn't...
And tried to time it,
And tried to time it, but you missed those certain times. I mean, you can miss 5 days, and it can put you in negative territory if you miss the 5 big up days.
Exactly.
Right? So
exactly.
It's an argument for keeping your money in the market and not getting emotional.
Exactly.
Like if the market, like in 2022, a lot of people panicked and wanted to pull money out, right?
22 when the was a bad year.
Yeah, it went down 17 to 20%.
Yes.
And then people panicked and they wanted to pull their money out. But if they'd left it in, look, this year the S&P hit record highs. So they should have just left it in.
Exactly.
Now, if people are in retirement, they might be in a position where they can't leave it all in. You know, they have to pull some out to live on, but that's if they're working with a trusted financial professional like yourself and they're in retirement, all their money isn't going to be in the S&P. There's going to be some money elsewhere to live on during that time.
That's a good point to bring up. So Jeff Quick will dive more into the income or the distribution phase of what it actually looks like when you are retired, because you're exactly right. Like, we do want to have a little bit of exposure to those growth oriented stocks like we had talked about during this podcast, but like you said, there's going to need to be some conservative exposure as well to live off of in the short term like needs that you have. So you're exactly nail on the head there.
Yeah. I just thought I'd point that out because what you're pointing out with that article is great. If you pull your money out of the market and try to time it and you miss the upswing, you can just miss 5-10 days and be out a good amount of money. Is that what that says?
Yeah, so I'm reading it here. A hypothetical $100,000 investment in stocks would have been affected by missing just a few of the market's top performing days over a 20-year period. So if you had $100,000 initially invested and you did not pull out of the market whatsoever, you should hypothetically have $616,317 at the end of that 20-year time horizon. And so if you had missed the 10 best days of the market, you would essentially have that $282,000.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, you started with 100 over a 20-year period, but you pulled your money out and missed the 10 top days.
Yeah.
It's the difference between just over 200,000 and 600,000.
Yes.
That's insane.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and that we get into the weeds. I know you've talked about dollar cost averaging your way back in and things like that. But really, if you have your money properly allocated and your assets properly allocated and work with a professional and have you do that, then you don't have to worry about the ups and downs. You don't have to worry about the 2022s, right?
Exactly. 2018s, 2000s, 08. There's
a few of them in there.
There's a lot of bad years, but it doesn't matter over time.
Yeah.
So acknowledge
there's
that.
more. I think it's over 70%, like 73% of the years are good. and it's just the others that are bad.
Yeah, there's a lot of statistics out there, and we have marketing materials that we can bring up in our client appointments just to spend some time on clients who might need that exposure, more conversations to talk about, where it's like, okay, this is what it looks like over time, over the last 50 years of investing, like how many years we're actually down versus how many were up. Statistically, there's a lot more up years than down years. And so, acknowledging that.
Yeah. Well, this is good. Accumulation is important in understanding where your money is at and making sure it's properly balanced. That's what you do for your clients and the people you meet with there at Paladin. So great show today.
I know.
Ellie, this has been great.
Good. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Why don't you, before we go, let our listeners know if they have questions, how they can get a hold of you.
Well, questions or any topics that you'd like to hear on, please just shoot us an email, info@paladinfinancial.com. Or if you're ready to set an appointment with myself or one of the other advisors in the office, just give us a call, 651-842-8406. We're excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Great, Ellie. Great show today. And
Thanks,
listeners, that does it for today's episode of Paladin Financial Talk with our host, Ellie Robison.
Thanks, Tony.